Others waiting. Okay. And I'll get my gavel up, make it official. And good morning. I'm going to go ahead and call this session, well, afternoon for some folks, but this session of the City of Lake Stevens Hearing Examiner to order. For the record, today is September 6th, 2022 at 11 a.m. We have essentially two items, I guess, on the agenda, though they are certainly interrelated. The first is number LUA 2021-0211 involving a site-specific rezone request. And the other is numbers LUA 2021-0210 and LUA 2021-0212 involving a request for approval of a preliminary plat and a variance associated with that plat request. I'll kind of quickly run through at the top in terms of the site-specific rezone. This would involve changing the zoning designation of an undeveloped 11.22 acre property off of or along the Natchez cutoff from the R6 zoning designation to the R8 through 12 zoning designation, although the comprehensive plan designation of medium density residential would stay the same. And the request to rezone the site would allow for residential development of that property at a higher density than would otherwise be allowed, as is now being requested in the accompanying application for the preliminary plat and variance approval. In terms of the other request, that does involve a request for approval of a preliminary plat to subdivide approximately 5.3 acres of the undeveloped 11.22 acre property into 36 lots for single family residential development as a cluster subdivision with associated infrastructure appurtenances and improvements. And the applicant also requests the variance in these circumstances, specifically from the municipal code requirements to exceed the maximum height for retaining walls that would normally be allowed. And sorry, my notes point out this is concurrent with the rezone. So I think that's the sort of basics of what the requests are. For the record, my name is Andrew Reeves. I'm a hearing examiner with Sound Law Center, who the city has selected to hold certain application hearings like this one. In terms of the rezone, it will be my role today to collect evidence in the form of exhibits and testimony to determine whether the proposal is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and the specific requirements for approval of a site-specific rezone under section 1416C090 of the Lake Stevens Municipal Code. And in that instance, I would ultimately make a recommendation to the city council, and the city council would have the final approval authority over that rezone request. In terms of the rezone, I believe there were 10 exhibits that I reviewed in advance of the hearing, and we can talk more about those shortly. And then in terms of the underlying project, as it were, my role, again, collect evidence in the form of exhibits and testimony to determine in this instance whether the proposal would be consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, zoning ordinances, critical areas ordinances, and the specific requirements for approval of a variance under section 1416C 115 related to retaining wall heights, as well as meets the criteria for preliminary plat approval and cluster subdivision approval in chapters 1418 and 1488 of the municipal code. In addition, because this would involve the subdivision of land, ensure that it complies with our state subdivision act in chapter 5817 of the revised code of Washington. And so for the plat proposal and variance, I believe it was 12 exhibits with sub exhibits that I reviewed in advance of the hearing. So all testimony today, I note, will be under oath or affirmation. That's because were any appeals to occur, ultimately the recording of the hearing as well as the admitted exhibits and my decisions would serve as the foundation for any such appeals. The order that we typically follow, and I believe we'll follow today, is first we'll swear in and hear from city staff, who will give an overview of the proposal and the review process that led us to today's hearings. After that, we'll hear from the applicant team. I believe we've got several members of the team available today. And then after that, If there are members of the public interested in testifying, they will have that opportunity. I know there were some public comments received in advance in the hearing, but it does not currently appear that any members of the public have joined us. But we'll check later in the hearing to see if that's changed. And if so, they would have an opportunity to testify. And then if necessary, we'll go back to the applicant team and city staff to respond to any such testimony. So we can coordinate. In my mind, I thought we would address the rezone first and then go into the plat, unless Ms. Schmidt, did you have a different thought?
No, hearing examiner, that would be appropriate. The rezone first.
Excellent. Okay, so with that, I'll get you sworn in. And do you swear or affirm to tell the truth in the testimony you give here today?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And if you could just state and spell your name for the audio and explain your role here at the city.
My name is Christine Schmidt, Senior Planner at City of Lake Stevens. My name is spelled Christi. My last name is spelled Schmidt.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Schmidt. So in terms of the exhibits related to the rezone, was my determination that I think it was 10. Did that seem accurate?
Yes, that's correct. And I would like to enter a hard copy of the PowerPoint presentation, Exhibit 10. I'm going to hand it to the clerk here to enter it as formally the exhibit.
Okay. And then hopefully there's an electronic version that the clerk can provide to my office, as we've worked diligently to move beyond hard copies. But for the official record, if that's what the city would like, that's fine. They maintain the official record. I do not. So
yes, that Exhibit 10 will be digitally transmitted to you for the record.
Great. Thank you. So if you have your PowerPoint and you'd like to go ahead, please do.
I sure do. I'm going to go ahead and start and share my screen for the rezone. And okay, if any point in time something is not clear, if someone could speak up and please let me know, I would greatly appreciate it. So right now I'm going to start the staff's presentation for the public hearing for the Hisey rezone. So entered into the record, as was noted by the hearing examiner, we have the exhibits 1 through 10. Background information for the rezone. The applicant is here today. That would be Rochelle Smith with the Land Pro Group. The property owner is JM1 Land Holdings, and the property address, it is an undeveloped site along the Machias cutoff in Lake Stevens. The property data information is all contained within the staff report. The parcel size, is noted by the hearing examiner, is 11.22 acres. The intent is for the applicant to move forward with a preliminary plat and variance for a 36-lot subdivision. That public hearing will be held after this rezone hearing. Basic information regarding the site. Here's an aerial of the vicinity map of the property. It's highlighted in red. The property was annexed into the city in 2021. And as you can see, the Machias cutoff, I'm pointing to it with my arrow. It runs along the northern portion of the site. The property is developed to the north with a plat that was developed in the county, as over to the west. It is abutted by single-family residential large lot homes over here to the west and also to the east. There is also single-family homes located to the south and some undeveloped parcels also. Moving forward, the comp plan designation for the site is medium density residential. There's no change for this. The current zoning is R6 with a proposal to move to a rezone, which is what is before us today, to R8 to R12. Within the staff report, it outlines the permissible zone districts that's compatible with the MDR land use designation, and that also includes the R8, R12 designation. Here's a look at the current zoning map. It's highlighted on the left. It's designated in red for current zoning. As you can see, it's designated currently R6. The applicant's proposal today is to move forward with a rezone to R8 to R12, which would turn it to the orange color as shown on the city's zoning map. Here's a look at the city's comprehensive plan use designation. As you can see, the site and surrounding the site on all directions, it's designated as medium density residential. So the surrounding uses are compatible with the medium density residential zone. The application was received from the applicant in late December, the 23rd of 2021. The application and public hearing were publicly noticed. I received comments from parties and adjacent neighbors. The public meeting was held on February 3rd, and this was a combined public meeting for both the preliminary plat, the variance, and the rezone. The rezone itself, it's a type 4 permit, as was stated by the hearing examiner. The hearing examiner recommendation gets moved to the city council. The city council does make the final decision on the rezone. And so the preliminary plat and the variance are pending until a decision on the rezone is made. The rezone determination is actually exempt from SEPA because the city did do a SEPA threshold determination with a comp plan, which was adopted, and I have my comp plan here, in 2015. So an exemption was issued for it back in June. Background information on the actual proposal itself. The max density for this particular plat or the lot, if they were to do a lot yield for the R6 zone, is 42 dwelling units per acre. The max density for the R8 and R12 is 64 dwelling units per acre. So if the proposed density under the R8, R12 is approved, the applicant is actually looking at proposing 36 dwelling units. On site, there are 2 wetlands and there's 2 unregulated water courses also. And in addition, there's 2 offsite wetlands. However, their buffers do overlap onto the site, and all the buffers for the wetlands on and off site is 110 feet. And this has been reviewed under a critical areas report, reviewed under the preliminary plat and the variance. As far as traffic impacts goes, 36 new PM peak hour vehicle trips is what is predicted and calculated per the traffic report for the R8, R12 proposal. This would be an increase of 6 PM peak hour trips over development under the straight R6 zone. And we do like to point out the difference so you can see the difference in the impacts. As far as public comments that were received, we received 2 particularly for this project. They're contained within the staff report, I'd like to point out. And the difference, some of the items that were brought up from public comment was the zoning and the difference between the R6 and the R8, 12 zone districts and how that would play out as far as the development proposal, which I just outlined. And also the rezoning process. How does the city process a rezone? So that was explained to several residents and also during the public meeting back in February. Traffic concerns were brought up as far as traffic impacts. And I would like to direct comments regarding the pedestrian crossing along Machias Road and also the 123rd Avenue intersection. Specific comments for that are contained and also a response from the applicant's traffic engineer within the preliminary plat and the variance application. So you'll find detailed responses to those particular items in the plat and variance application, as are other specific comments, and they're outlined in the staff report. So that would summarize comments received for the rezone and also the plat. As far as rezone criteria, what the city is held to as far as approving a rezone, there are several different criteria. One is the site-specific rezone. It does need to conform to the comprehensive plan, needs to be in compliance with GMA. It should advance the public health, safety, and welfare, and the amendment needs to be consistent to the city's growth targets. In addition, is there adequate area to develop per the standards in the zoning district, and that the proposal is not materially detrimental, and also there needs to be adequate infrastructure. I would like to point out that back in March 2022, this particular area for the Hisey property, it was annexed into the Lake Stevens Sewer District. And as associated with the preliminary plat and the variance, the applicant is proposing in conjunction with the sewer district to install a lift station to serve the area. Environmental impacts can be mitigated, and the amendment does comply to the zoning regulations. Staff findings and conclusions, which is outlined in the staff report. And let me see here really quickly. I'm going to go ahead and provide those page numbers to you. That is outlined specifically starting on page 9 to page 11. Staff finds that the proposal for the site-specific rezone, that it is consistent with the comp plan, the zoning district, the rezone criteria, and as conditioned, staff recommends that it will meet the city standards at the time of development and that the city has met the procedural requirements. In conclusion, staff's recommendation is to forward approval of the rezone LUA 2021-0211, subject to the conditions contained in the staff report, to the city council. I would like to note that the rezone approval first must be obtained prior to the preliminary and variance being approved. And with that, that would conclude staff's presentation as far as the rezone, and staff is open for any questions that the hearing examiner or if any audience has joined us that they have for staff.
Sure, thank you. And just to clarify, for future projects, as a general rule, we don't have sort of a public meeting process where everybody gets to ask questions. Ultimately, it's a little more focused. Nobody's joined. I just want to point that out. But I do have a few questions specific to the rezone, Ms. Schmidt. I guess the first is sort of a bigger picture. Even though clearly we have a plan that has been proposed by the applicant in terms of, they have a plan for what they would like to do with this property. Technically, it is possible that in these circumstances, the rezone could be approved independently, such that even if the plat weren't approved, the rezone could be approved. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, and I'm not saying I'm tipping my hand or anything. I have not made a determination about the plat or even the rezone. Why I ask is because one of the recommended conditions for the rezone, let me pull up, my apologies, pull up the staff recommendation, had some language I just wanted to maybe discuss real quick, which was the second condition that was recommended is that the rezone approval by the council must first be obtained prior to the preliminary plat being approved. I guess my thinking was it might be appropriate to change that language such that either there's no reference to the plat or the rezone approval by the council must be obtained prior to any, development of the site. Well, I almost would eliminate the condition to the extent that I'm wary of tying myself in knots there, but does my concern make sense?
Yes, it does. I could see that condition being modified to be generalized, or the rezone approval must be approved by city council prior to any subsequent development or subdivision of the site.
Sure, and I guess even the challenge there is a subsequent development consistent with the new zoning, right? So I mean, currently anyone could develop this property consistent with the R6 zone, but any development consistent with the R8 through 12 zone on a specific proposal would need the rezone would have to happen before that occurs.
I see your point. I would concur that condition could be struck.
Okay, I know it seems like a minor thing, but too many times, these things come up and can cause problems. So I just wanted to ensure there was sort of no issue with that. So that was my first question. The next one had to do with the traffic impact fees, et cetera. There's discussion in the materials for both the rezone and the specific project. I guess my question is, are are there impact fees associated with rezones, or would all of those fees be specific to future specific development of the site? Hopefully that question makes sense.
Yes, and you are correct. They would all be associated with a future development of it. I think the language intended there was just to point out that there would be an increase in traffic with a proposed rezone, but any associated impact fee should be associated with the plat itself.
Okay, so yeah, there's not two separate assessments of fees, one for the site-specific rezone and one for the project itself. Fees are only collected when there are boots on the ground doing work, as it were, right? When there are specific projects, as opposed to the sort of meta change in the zoning. Is that an accurate way to think about that?
That is correct. Impact fees are only associated with the preliminary plat.
There you go. Specific development. Okay.
Thank you for that clarification.
Oh, nope. I just wanted to make sure that I understood. And then I think you went through the SEPA exemption. And again, that was pretty clear to me, but just so it's clear on the record, the rezone was determined to be exempt from further review under SEPA. And there's specific language in the WACs for site-specific rezones and when it's appropriate to exempt them. And one of those requirements is that environmental impacts were previously reviewed through an earlier environmental review process, and that occurred here when the site was annexed. Is that right?
That is correct, and I would further state that I'd refer to Exhibit 8, the SEPA exemption for the rezone that was issued on June 23rd, 2022, which it specifically accounts for that exemption.
Yep, great. Okay. All right, I think that was probably it in terms of, sorry, just checking my notes here. I think that was probably it for me in terms of questions specific to the rezone. I think we went through apologies. I think we went through what the exhibits were, and we will add the staff PowerPoint presentation, but I do not have any further questions specific to the rezone. Were there other members of city staff you intended on calling before we hear from the applicant?
No, hearing examiner.
Great, thank you. So I believe it will be Rochelle Smith on behalf of the applicant.
Yes.
Hi,
Can you hear me?
I can. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth in the testimony you give here today?
I do.
Thank you. And if you could just spell and state your name and spell it for the record, please.
Okay, my name is Rochelle Smith, and that is spelled Rochelle. Last name Smith, Smith.
Thank you for being here.
Yep. Okie doke. So, yeah, so the applicant, well, I guess are you ready for me?
I'm ready, sorry.
Okay, no worries.
I know it's a little strange to compartmentalize things, but I thought it might be easier to kind of run through the rezone quickly, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty, as it were, when we address the specific project, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the city did a pretty good job of overview, so I don't have a ton to add, other than I will say that we did prepare and submit a site-specific rezone in accordance with the Lake Stevens Municipal Code, as outlined in their report. And we have read through their entire staff report, and we do agree with the conditions that were recommended. I will say that per your comment regarding condition number 2, I don't see that being a problem for us if there is some sort of revision or elimination of that condition in whole. And I'm getting a thumbs up from my boss that he agrees with that. And I personally don't have anything else to add other than, like I said, we do agree with the conditions currently set forth.
Okay. With what we just discussed, obviously. So
Yes,
I
with
think,
what we just discussed. If there is a revision to condition number 2, as we discussed, we would be in support of that as well. So
got it. Okay. And
whatever makes it the most clear.
yes, we're always trying to impose a little order on the chaos. So thank you. And I do note, the applicant did submit detailed materials, both for the preliminary plat variance, but also for the rezone. And that did include addressing, a project narrative, addressing change circumstances, etc. I was curious. There was a reference to some major announcement about industrial projects in the Arlington, Marysville area. I was curious if anyone knows what that was or can share it with me. But other than that, I didn't have any specific questions for the applicant.
Okay, I'm like kind of have heard rumors of this industrial project, but I personally do not know exactly what they are.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we will have questions probably when we come back here in a sec for the plat, but nothing
Yeah.
further that I had. Any members of your team on the rezone that wanted to provide any additional thoughts? If so, they can wave at me.
I don't think so.
Okay, so I think we're fine. So with that, in terms of the rezone itself, I'm guessing no further thoughts from city staff. Is that right, Ms. Schmidt?
That's correct.
Okay, so having reviewed the materials in specific to the rezone, I can state that my intent would be to issue a recommendation to the council recommending approval of the rezone. I intend on either eliminating condition 2 altogether that was recommended, or at least sort of clarifying it. But other than that, I think that the materials have shown that in these circumstances, it would be appropriate for the property to be rezoned regardless of any future development that occurs. So that would be my intent, and the parties are aware I have limited authority in terms of zoning, and ultimately it is the political process where the council makes the final determination. But my intent would be to issue a recommendation of approval on the rezone to the council. So I think we can wrap up the first part there on the rezone, and I already sort of explained what would happen in terms of the plat, but I think now we can kind of dive in, and I'll go back to Ms. Schmidt on behalf of the city. And now we can focus on the plat, and I'm mixing up all of my exhibits. I apologize. So with the plat, I believe there were 12 exhibits that were provided in advance of the hearing, and there were some sub exhibits. And I do note that there was one additional comment, as it were, that was provided to me this morning, which was going to be, I believe we were going to add it as 8J, as in Joseph. And that was comments from the Snohomish PUD, and then some sort of back and forth, as it were, with the applicants and city staff related to those comments. So I have reviewed all of these materials, but does that sound accurate in terms of what city staff was hoping I would review in terms of the preliminary plat, Ms. Schmidt?
Yes, that is accurate. And for the record, I will be giving this to the clerk here. 8J is the formal exhibit that you receive via email. And then in addition, a hard copy that will be digitally transmitted to you, which is the staff's PowerPoint presentation, which would be exhibit 12.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And so with that, feel free to launch into your PowerPoint.
Okay, perfect. I'm just going to go ahead and find it and pull it up here. Let me pull it back up. It's not showing up. There it is. Okay, is that visible to everyone there? There we go.
It's visible. I note that this is, I believe, Ms. Schmidt's first matter before me, but she has continued the long tradition in the city of Lake Stevens of having very beautiful cover pages for their PowerPoints. So
I'd like to thank IT for that. So with that, I'll go ahead and start the staff's public hearing presentation for the Hisey preliminary plat and the variance. As noted by the hearing examiner, entered into the record are exhibits 1 through 12. There was a new exhibit entered, and I would like to note there is a revised condition that was also entered into the record. And this is regarding having the requirement for above ground utilities along the site's frontage in accordance with Snohomish County PUD development requirements. And internal to the plat, they will be underground as required by the code. I would like to state for the record that city staff has been out on the site 3 times. My most recent site visit was conducted on August 24th, 2022. Background information, the applicant is the same. It is Rochelle Smith with the Land Pro Group. Property owner is JM1 Land Holdings or Holdings. Property address is the same. The property size is 11.22 acres. There is a concurrent rezone application that was previously had a public hearing prior to this one that we just held. Here's the location of the site and the vicinity map. It was annexed into the city in 2021. You can see the location is denoted in red on the aerial. As far as background information, the application was received on December 23rd. The application and the public hearing, they were duly noticed. And a public meeting was held in conjunction with the rezone on February 3rd. It was an online meeting. It was very well attended. We had approximately 15 people attend the virtual online neighborhood meeting. There was a variety of comments received, and those will be discussed later in staff's presentation. Both the plat and the variance are type 3 permits that do require a hearing examiner decision. I would like to note that approval of these 2 type 3 permits, it is contingent upon the rezone approval by City Council. So the type 3 permit for both the plat and the variance, they're quasi judicial proceeding. We are holding a public hearing, and the public meeting, as I noted, was held back in February. There was a SEPA MDNS, which was issued back on August 15th. As far as property information goes, the comprehensive plan designation is medium density residential. The current zoning is R6. The site itself is subject to a proposed rezone to R8 to R12, and the proposed plat design is based on the approval of that rezone. The site itself, it had been logged about 20, 30 years ago. It's regrowth, so it's forested, and it has areas with critical areas and slopes on the site. There are 2 wetlands and 2 unregulated water courses on the western portion of the site, and you'll see that those are noted in the NGPA track on Exhibit 5. There are 2 offsite wetlands that have on-site buffers. Those buffers do incorporate a large portion of the western portion of the site. The plat design is based on the R8, R12 zone district. And here's taking a look for the record for the preliminary plat. The site itself is currently zoned R6. The proposed zoning is proposed to be changed to the R8, R12, as we previously discussed in the rezone hearing. Here's an overview and looking at the preliminary plat map itself. As you can see, here is the site's frontage along the Machias cutoff. The applicant is proposing frontage improvements here. Access is located on the eastern portion of the site. It does require impacts internally to a wetland, which is permitted per the city's critical areas regulations. As you go down here, there are public roads, Road A and Road B, terminates in a cul-de-sac with a fire turnaround. And you can see the NGPA and the critical areas, they're all proposed to be contained in track 993. Over here is a single family residence over to the west. And over to the east, I'd like to point out is another single family residence. And for the sake of reference in discussion with public comment, I would like to point out that the residence over to the east is the Gambles. The residence over to the west is the Cusseys. Loretta Cussey is her first name. Annette, John, and Jody are the Gambles located on the east. As far as specific design features of the plat, the lot sizes vary between 3,600 to 5,880. They are proposing to do a rural cluster subdivision. As noted, there's only one access point off Machias. The frontage improvements do include a bus pullout, which was specifically requested by the Snohomish School District. In addition, there will be ADA ramps, curb, gutters, sidewalks, along with a planter strip and street trees, and the pavement requirement overlay and striping. There's one large NGPA track. They are proposing buffer mitigation and averaging. This area is to be enhanced with native trees and shrubs, which is discussed within the staff report and also contained, within the critical areas report in detail. There are several access tracks to 3 lots. You will see those. They do have delineated pedestrian walkways along the sides. There is a recreational open space. The applicant has fulfilled that as outlined in the staff report. They are proposing a play structure, a picnic table, along with a bench. And this is going to be overlaid on top of underground detention vaults, along with landscaping and fencing for resident use, safety, and also for visual aesthetics. The internal roads, they have met the guest parking ratio requirements along Road A and Road B. The fire turnaround is provided in the cul-de-sac, and homes are to be sprinkled per the fire code as outlined in the staff report. The fire department has reviewed and approved the preliminary plat application. Per the arborist report, there are 268 significant trees which have been identified, not indentified on site. I'd like to point out the typo in my presentation here. And in addition to these 268 trees, there's been an additional 8 unhealthy or problematic trees that were identified by the arborist. They lie outside the perimeter of the clearing limits. And so they're proposing to remove them so they don't pose any hazard to any future residents. And they are proposing to do replacement on site. And in addition, approximately 300 of them, they're going to use the city's tree in lieu of fund for that. And you will see a specific condition in the staff report to retain 2 of the large trees along the eastern frontage. The staff has worked with the applicant last week, and the applicant has confirmed that these 2 large cedars can be retained. So I'd like to thank the applicant for providing that survey information last week regarding that. In addition to the preliminary plat, there is a variance request due to the topography on the site and the critical areas to increase the retaining wall maximum height. The code has a cap of 8 feet. The applicant is proposing to increase this by 2 feet, which would be to a total of 10 feet or 25%. This is processed through the public hearing process. And so there's a section in the staff report that outlines the applicant's proposal, their compliance with the variance criteria. So I've included just a brief summary of it in the staff's presentation here today. Here's an overview I was anticipating some of the neighbors to attend, but I haven't seen them in attendance here at the hearing. So I included this graphic. I won't go into detail with it. However, at the public meeting, as a result of the public meeting back in February, city staff outreach to the applicant and they prepared site sections. So the adjacent property owner, particularly the Gambles, could see the impacts to their property with the increase in the retaining wall height. I would like to point out here is the Gamble property. Their residence does sit close here to the property line. So their concern obviously was privacy. They requested screening requirements here. So as a result, you'll see conditions within the staff report that on top of the retaining wall, that there is a 6-foot cedar fence to be installed at certificate of occupancy of the homes. Right here where the road stub B will be, the residents over here were not in favor of a future road stub. However, I'd like to point out, due to the city's comprehensive plan and road connectivity requirements that are required from the comp plan and implemented per the code, the city has a future road connection here. There will be a 6-foot cedar fence here, and the future road connection sign will be posted on the west side only, so it doesn't provide any visual, I guess, non-favoritism towards the resident over here. They didn't want to see any sign on their property, so the city obviously is only requiring the sign on the western side of the cedar fence. And so the retaining walls are noted here. You can see in the dark bubble outline, there's 2 different types of retaining walls that are proposed. The applicant's rationale regarding this is that the variance is requested. It's not due to anything that the applicant has done, but due to site constraints. The topography, the critical areas located on the site, and the city's requirement for the road connection. With this, it would result in 9 lots would be reduced from 36 down to a total of 27 lots. The infrastructure requirements remain the same. It still requires a lift station, the frontage improvements, along with electrical, gas, etc., that is required. And so the result would be a less efficient use of the land, and it would also contribute fewer housing units to help address the city's shortage and our growth projection needs for the 2040 population deficit. This is outlined in the city staff report to you. You will see that under the variance criteria and also in the rezone staff report. There were public comments received. The city staff received 3 comments in writing, multiple ones from the same residents. The concerns, I'm going to summarize them, concern the proposed zoning, the rezone, the traffic impacts, just general development of the area in general. Historically, this area was recently annexed into the city in 2021. So it's been a transition for the residents, going from rural per se to county development to city developments. We discussed the rezone process, how the rezoning would work, and also concerns about students walking to and from school and pedestrian safety. There was concern over the access location and this as you come around the corner as far as visibility goes. So as a result of the public meeting and these comments that were brought up, the city requested of the applicant to go forward and prepare 2 additional traffic analysis, one for the pedestrian crossing at the Machias cutoff, if there is a need for that. Then in addition, at the intersection of 123rd and Machias, if there was a need for a controlled stop there. Both of those concluded, and the city reviewed them, that there was not a need for that for either of those, or they weren't warranted at this time. Moving forward to the variance criteria, it is summarized within the staff report. I've listed them here on the screen just for the sake and thinking that we would have a public audience here today. Unless there's a dire need, I'm going to skip through them because they are outlined in the staff report.
That's fine.
In summary, the preliminary plat and the variance decision criteria. They include compliance with these following code sections, the RCW. And I would like to point out that number 7, the SEPA threshold determination, that the city did receive 2 comments during the SEPA MDNS period. They were received, I believe, on the weekend and then on Monday, the 29th. They did not require any additional mitigation measures, nor were any appeals filed. Staff's findings and conclusion based on the exhibits, the record and the staff report finds that the preliminary plat and the variance is consistent with the comprehensive plan contingent upon the rezone approval. It meets the intent of the R8, R12 zone in the zoning standards. As conditioned, it will meet the RCW 58 requirements. Utilities are available to serve the plat, and the procedural requirements for this application has been met. In conclusion, staff's recommendation is approval of the preliminary plat and the variance subject to the conditions in the staff report and as amended this morning for condition number 24. And with that, that concludes staff's presentation this morning.
Great, thank you. A few questions. So just to be clear about the variance request is to increase the height of the retaining walls from 8 to 10, but the municipal code does not then care whether fences go on top. The fences themselves are independent of the retaining wall. Is that an accurate assessment of the situation?
That is correct. They are viewed as separate.
Okay.
And in fact, over a certain height, the fence or a barrier structure to prevent falling is required on top of a retaining wall.
From a policy standpoint, I think that probably makes some sense. Okay, so I just wanted to verify that. And then, and that the variance could have been administrative if it was a 20% request as opposed to 25%. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Sure. The one sort of question I had in terms of the concerns related, I think, to the retaining walls that were expressed by neighboring property owners. I think it's the folks to the east, but is there any mechanism or method or way by which they're able to have any kind of input into the sort of the look at the end of it all? And you know, I recognize the function and purpose of a retaining wall is not aesthetic, but you know, I certainly understand folks on neighboring properties having that concern, and I can't recall it's happened in Lake Stevens. I know in other jurisdictions, the applicants sometimes agree to sort of at least try to get input on, you know, the look of the final product, as it were. I just wasn't sure if there's a mechanism that you're aware of in Lake Stevens for that kind of a thing.
There is not. Within our code, we do have a provision within the retaining walls to provide landscaping or trailing landscaping if it's visible to the public. Staff offered that to the neighbors to the east. However, they didn't want any additional maintenance, nor did they want something trailing over into their property, because their property currently along that property line is obviously wooded. And so they wanted to maintain privacy. I believe if I were to go back in correspondence, they would have preferred at the end of the day a very large, tall, just solid concrete wall is what their preference would be versus a retaining wall and a fence. So based on our code and our code requirements, staff conditioned the retaining wall and to minimize the grade. So you'll see where road B is, it does level out. So the retaining wall height has been minimized. And then staff has imposed, obviously, the screening requirement of a 6-foot cedar fence on top of that as a compromise and to meet code requirements.
Sure. Okay. Let's see. Trees, I was just curious in terms of, you had testified just now that there was recently sort of working through an agreement with the applicant to retain the two large trees that were discussed. My only question is the conditions themselves that have been recommended, I believe, were based on numbers in the arborist report, and I was just curious if there's any impact because of that in terms of what the numbers are, or if that would be an unrelated non-issue.
That is an excellent question. And so when preparing my staff report, I did have to go back and verify that the two trees noted, you will see in condition 14 in the staff report, that those are not included in the significant tree and replacement ratio because they border the property line, or they're just off-site and the roots encroach on-site. So it required the applicant going and doing not some off-site survey, but to look to see where the root zones were at, to see if they would be able to be retained during construction, just because they're very large, mature, nice cedar trees there. And I know they were concerns also of the Gambles, and they'd like to have those retained.
Got it. So they essentially retaining them doesn't count, as it were, toward the overall numbers of trees on site, but retaining them essentially means and ensuring they're not hurt, damaged, et cetera, during construction. And it's an amenity that folks appreciate. Is that sort of an accurate assessment?
That is an accurate assessment.
Okay, wanted to make sure I understood that. Okay, asked that question already. And in terms of stormwater analysis, can you verify what version or of the manual, or what manual is currently being used and is the one that would be required to be adhered to for this proposal?
They were under, I believe, the 2014 manual. And let me go look at my stormwater surface water section. And this was, stormwater was reviewed by city staff along with the city's third-party consultant, which is DEA and Associates. And they provided a compliance memorandum contained within the exhibits. And let me just verify, I believe it is the 2014, although the city is now under the 2019 manual.
That's partially, yeah, I was just wanting to, so my understanding is the application was deemed complete January 13, 2022, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then I'm happy to let Mr. McCord or someone on his team provide any thoughts they would like to in terms of whether stormwater requirements vest or not, but the review that occurred, I believe, was the 2012 with the 2014 updates. And I think
Well, yeah, and I will like to note that staff provided feedback to them, our stormwater manager, that the difference between the 2014 and the 2019 manual, that they still complied under the 2019 manual. And they did provide the infiltration and feasibility letter is required. If that helps your examiner.
Very much. So just to verify what we're discussing. So ultimately, and that was that additional memorandum specific to infiltration and LID feasibility, but you know, the newer 2019 manual is not massively different, but there is, as we have over time, an increased sort of thought to mimicking natural processes. And so my understanding is that the applicant has made, well, the applicant A determined that infiltration was not feasible, but B, I believe there's some effort being made on site to provide hydrologic recharge of at least one of the wetlands. Is that right? Did I
Yes,
read-
that is correct.
Okay, I think that clarifies things. All right, I think I'm almost through my questions here. All right, so we had third-party review. I guess apologies. The other question more generally I had related to the sort of stubbing out future development issue, which is, was it determined that in terms of what would make sense for a future road connection to the east made more sense? I was wondering why there weren't potential stub outs to the south or the west, or sort of what was the thought process that led to that being where it is, as it were.
Absolutely, that's an excellent question. Staff did explore that with the applicant quite extensively during the pre-application and early design phase. We were working with our Public Works Department. We initially thought, honestly, like yourself and the neighbors, that, wow, you know, why couldn't we locate it down here to the south? But if you go look at the topo map and in fine detail, they're very steep slopes along this portion of the site, and it was not conducive to constructing a through road there. So ultimately, Public Works adjusted the location of the road stub up here, further up. It would be towards midway through the site, where it flattened and leveled out. One, to reduce grading, which is consistent with cities code and minimizing impacts. And it still provided enough linear foot difference between the site's frontage and a road connection for development north of where the stub road would connect.
Got it. Well, great. Clearly you guys thought about it. So thank you. Nice when that has occurred. So I'm trying to think. I believe those were the specific questions I had for staff, other than I always like to ask, but have there been any significant changes to the comprehensive plan or city zoning ordinances that would impact this proposal since the application was deemed complete back in January?
There has not.
Excellent. Okay. Then unless you had anything further or you intended on calling on other members of staff, we'll move back to Rochelle Smith. So if you want to stop sharing your screen, that'd be
Perfect. I'll stop sharing.
thank you. Okay, so Ms. Smith, you were sworn in earlier, so no need to do that again, but thank you for being here on the Plat specifically. And this is your opportunity to provide any additional thoughts, comments, information, clarification, etc.
Okay, yeah, I did take a few notes while she was going through her PowerPoint just to provide some clarification. One thing, I'm sure she mentioned it, but maybe I missed it, and that is this is going to be a cluster subdivision, which allows for the reduced lot sizes and widths. And so with that, I would like to note that per the code, we are required to provide 6,692 square feet. However, we are providing 13,694, which is obviously in excess of what is required. In addition, she did, just to clarify on the trees, because when I was reading the PowerPoint, it sounded maybe a little bit confusing. So there's 276 trees in total that are being removed. And so the replacement ratio for the city is a 3-to-1 ratio, which is a total replacement required of 828 trees. So we are planting 525 trees on site, and then 303 trees will be paid to the fee in lieu fund that the city has for that. Let's see here, what else did I note here? In regards to the variance, I know there was discussion about the property to the east, the Gamble's property. So they did provide public comment. The city did respond to that, and so did we. Their concerns were about privacy. And so as Christy mentioned, we did propose to them, do you want us to do landscape screening to make it look nicer? That was going to end up being more of a maintenance issue that they would have a problem with. It was determined, okay, that's probably not a great idea. But we did agree, and we are in agreement with the condition listed regarding the 6-foot cedar fence on top, as well as the barricade where road B, the terminus of road B. And then let's see. Did I have anything else? Oh, regarding the 2 trees, we did send in an exhibit, I believe, on Friday to Christy. We did have our surveyor go out on site, those 2 cedar trees that she was wanting to have, or in the condition that the neighbor wasn't wanting to have those trees be saved. We did get the survey completed. We do know where they're located, and we've determined based on the construction in that area that preserving those trees should not be a problem. Besides that, I know you had brought up a comment regarding stormwater and what stormwater manual was used. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Mark Villwalk with LDC just to give a little bit further information on that.
Okay. And I'll swear him in. Mr. Villwalk, do you swear affirm to tell the truth in the testimony you give here today?
I do.
And if you could just state and spell your name for the audio.
Yes, my name's Mark Villwalk. First name M-A-R-K, last name V as in Victor, I-L-L-W-O-C-K. And I'm a licensed civil engineer with LDC.
Great. Thank you for being here.
All right, just some clarification on that. Technically, is my understanding, there is no vesting to stormwater regulations, but there are applicability standards that are outlined within the Phase 2 MPDS permit that the city has with the State Department of Ecology. And it states that all applications that were submitted before July 1st of 2022 are vested to the amended 2014 manual, and that they have until I'm scrolling down here, July 1st, 2027 to start construction. And so we have on this project to be applicable to those standards until July 1st, 2027. And that the standard outline for that generally is that the roads are graded in and that the utilities are substantially complete. Though I do want to add to the record that if for some reason this project is not built by that time frame, that generally the facilities proposed do meet the current stormwater manual, the 2019, as the city testified, and that it would not be an impact to the overall layout or size or shape or scale of the project if we did need to comply with the new standards. So I did want to clarify for the record that we are the applicable drainage manual is the amended 2014 manual.
Got it. So DOE's finally weighed in, provided some guidance. Well, not finally, I know it happened not just like this week or anything, but so it is always helpful to have that clarified. So thank you for clarifying. And just to also clarify, Mr. Villwalk, was I correct in my understanding about there are some efforts being made where possible to provide the sort of hydrologic recharge to on-site critical areas?
That's absolutely correct. We are sending some of the roof and footing drains towards the existing wetlands on site and provided calculations to show how the flows are similar to what there is today.
Okay. Do you have any other thoughts or comments from an engineering standpoint you wanted to share with us?
Not at this time. I believe everything that's been submitted in the record shows that we are in compliant with the city's codes and regulations.
Great, thank you. And actually, engineering question, I suppose, even if maybe this isn't your expertise, but the recent comments from the PUD, I think it was, in terms of not undergrounding utilities up on the sidewalk area. In your experience, would there be any challenges or impacts between the interplay between, I think Mr. McCourt has thoughts on this. Okay.
Yeah, I can certainly speak to this, and Mr. Hearing Examiner. We carefully designed the project to leave the existing poles in place, and so there is not an impact to the layout design as previously submitted to the city to leave those power poles in place. The one piece of information we realized, we had verbal conversations about that being the intent with the PUD, but had not confirmed it in writing, and wanted to get that in place for the hearing. And so the overall design intent of everything that's been submitted is that power remains above ground. And now we have all the official documentation showing that that's the intent by the PUD.
Well, sorry, and power remains above ground at the frontage, but within
Along the
plat.
frontage.
Okay, we're not
Yep.
going to have power lines going to each, my grandparents' home in Lodi, California, before they passed, Lodi always, all the power came, from the sky. It was a weird thing, but I think I grasp it, and it sounds like there won't be any issues. Is that an accurate assessment?
That is correct, and the power will just be above ground along the project frontage. It will be underground internal to the plot.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. So, Ms. Smith, do you have others you intended on calling on? Or thank you, Mr. Bullock.
It appears that Mr. McCourt has his hand up.
I was going to make him say something at a minimum, at least to say hi. But so, Mr. McCourt, we'll get you sworn in. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth in the testimony you give here today?
I do.
And if you could state and spell your name for the audio.
Patrick McCourt, Patrick. Last name McCourt.
Great. Thank you for being here. Go right ahead, sir.
I wanted to elaborate just a bit on the undergrounding of the frontage power lines along Machias Cutoff Road. Mark Vilwalk was correct. There was early conversation with PUD. There was also early conversation, which was not documented, with Eric Durpos, the prior public works director for the city. Within 2 weeks of those conversations, he was no longer with the city. The snafu that occurred is in the city code. It specifically identifies those roads where undergrounding of frontage is not required. This property was just recently annexed into the city, and as such, that code section had not been updated to include Machias Cutoff Road. It is a main feeder line, three-phase. PUD does not require undergrounding of main feeder three-phase power lines. So even though it is not specifically cited in the code, in my discussions with city staff this morning, there will be a code amendment forthcoming, likely this fall or certainly by next July, that will address properties recently annexed into the city where main feeder lines are impacting frontage improvements. As such, we did secure a letter which has been introduced to the record, I believe, from PUD stating that they would not be undergrounding the main feeder lines along Machias Cutoff Road.
Okay. And I don't know if you're the right person to ask or if Ms. Smith is. I just wanted to verify it. Clearly there was a suggestion to alter that condition, recommended condition, to address that issue. Other than that issue, did the applicant have any concerns or clarifications needed in terms of the other recommended conditions?
No.
I would just add one item, Mr.
Okay,
Examiner.
go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. With respect to retaining walls, there are primarily four types of retaining walls, referred to as ultra block, stone terra, and lock and load. The fourth would be a poured in place retaining wall. On the supply chain side, it has been absolutely more than difficult to secure retaining wall blocks for the various types of retaining walls that are available out there. Mark, I would ask you to describe the type of wall that we're using here, whether it's stone terra, ultra, or lock and load.
And this
Thanks.
is Mark Vilwalk with LDC again.
Yes. Just give me one quick second. I just want to look to see what was.
I thought it was number 2, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
It happens sometimes.
So of the three types of block, ultra block is a smooth faced concrete block, which is kind of ugly. Both stone terra and lock and load have a aesthetic feature to those walls. So Mark, have you identified the particular type we're using? What is it?
Yes, Mr. Hearing Examiner, it is lock and load retaining walls for the fill walls, and it'll be rockeries for some of the cut walls. Most of the walls that I believe all the walls underneath the variance request would be the lock and load style walls.
Thank you. So a thought on that further, Mr. McCoy?
No, I just wanted clarification and wanted you to be aware, not just for this hearing, but the many other hearings that you're involved in of those types of walls, and that the two walls that do have aesthetic appearance to them are the two defined lock and load and stone terra.
Okay. Got it. Okay, so there's they don't look like a giant asphalt block, or I get what your point is. They have some I don't know, aesthetic interest, as it were, and maybe not to the detail we just discussed. I certainly have some familiarity with retaining walls and what they look like, but thank you for clarifying that. And then while we have you, before we go back to Ms. Smith, did you have any clarification on the potential giant announcements that will be made? I'm just curious because, I'm like, is this something I approved in one of these jurisdictions? Do you know what this was in reference to, Mr. McCourt?
I do not.
Okay, it was independent, wouldn't matter in terms of this project. I just thought I'd ask because why not? So with that, I'll go back to Ms. Smith to see if she had any final thoughts, comments she wanted to share. And did we get an answer on, Ms. Smith, I think, can answer in terms of the conditions if there were any concerns.
So just to finish her up here, we have read through all of the conditions, and except for condition 24 that was originally proposed, which has now been revised, which we do concur with the revision. We do concur and agree with all of the conditions set forth in the staff report that was reviewed today. And we will be paying all the mitigation fees as required and set out in the conditions as well.
Okay, but only paying them once in terms of
yeah, we're
plat.
only paying them as part of the plat, not as part of the rezone.
And there we go. So that was clarified. But thank you. So I don't have any further questions for the applicant. Were there any other team members you wanted to call on, Ms. Smith?
No, not that I'm aware of. I think we
Okay.
were able to clarify what we needed to.
Great. We'll go back to the city then. Ms. Schmidt, any further thoughts or comments, or any other members of staff that you wanted to call on before we conclude the hearing today?
I would just like to reiterate that that was a correct summary as far as the above ground utility requirement. along the Machias cutoff that is discussed with the applicant, it would meet our above ground utility requirements as outlined in the code, particularly with the wetland there and the voltage of the PUD line. And so when we do our code amendment, it will be amended thus forced to be accurate.
Got it. And just to clarify, so I don't mess this up, so the 8J, I think it was, or 10, sorry, 8J was the Snoho, the PUD, but the change or the requested change in the language, was that a separate, or was that all part of 8J?
No, 8J is just the PUD email. And so I guess we could use, if you would like to refer to my PowerPoint exhibit, which had the amended condition in it.
Yeah, that would be fine. I
We
just
could
wanted to,
utilize that if that works, because I had the verbiage in there.
yep, just wanted to make sure that was somewhere easily found. So PowerPoint has correct language for new condition, or sorry, revised condition. Is it 24?
24, as does the email from city staff Jenny Fenrich dated Tuesday, September 6th at 10:05 a.m.
Which is that an exhibit? That was what I was trying to sort
It
out.
is not, but I could certainly enter it as an exhibit.
If it's in the PowerPoint, I think we're fine, but
Perfect. Let's leave
okay.
it in the PowerPoint then.
there we go. Okay, so I think then we do have everything now identified that will serve as the foundation for my decision. Again, this proposal would be contingent upon what the council ultimately decides on the rezone. But my intent is to, provide two separate decisions, and this one is more complicated than the rezone, and I do appreciate how thorough the materials were. Appreciate everyone answering my questions. I do have to do a little more additional review than my sort of normal cursory. I do look at everything before the hearing, but I want to give it a little further thought and review before I make up my mind, but I believe I do now have everything I need. So it is my intent to close the record today. I don't see any need to keep the record open. Obviously, the PowerPoints will be provided to my office electronically, but I think we have everything. So the plan would be to produce a decision on the requested preliminary plat, which is a clustered subdivision, preliminary plat and variance request here in the next couple weeks. So that'll be the plan. Just to verify, we don't have any members of the public, it looks like, that have joined us. And Ms. Fenrich, just to be clear, there's no spot at the city where folks that wanted to testify could do so in person. Is that right?
There is a spot, there's no one in it.
Okay, there's a spot, but no one's there. Okay. So just to verify, we did not have any members of the public providing testimony. So I think with that, we can go ahead and end our hearing. Thank you, everybody, for being here and taking part, and wish everybody safety, good health, great football season, and a nice fall ahead. So.